What's up, world, and welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like here on the Real News Network. I'm Jared Ball. Of all that I love about what hip hop has brought to the world, there is one thing above the rest that I love most: the mixtape. Now, we know that the idea of people arranging on a cassette tape for personal use, like road trips, parties, or trying to impress a potential loved one, had been around for a while before hip hop. But for hip hop, the mixtape has a special, particular history and function. The mixtape was, as Angela Ards once pointed out, hip hop's first mass medium. Others have noticed that without the mixtape, there would have never even been a rap music industry, demonstrating its own contradiction. And even yours truly has tried to argue that the mixtape can also be a national medium of dissident communication. To talk about some of this and more is Regan Sommer McCoy. McCoy is the founder of the Mixtape Museum. She has over 10 years of experience in the music industry, most notably as the manager of Virginia hip-hop duo Clips. She currently manages Global Spin Award winner DJ Ted Smooth and consults on various music projects. She serves on the Hip Hop Hall of Fame Artifacts, Exhibits, and Preservation Committee, is director of educational programs at Rhymes Over Beats, a hip-hop theater company, and is a member of the Hip Hop Education and Preservationists Alliance. For more, you can find her work at mixtapemuseum.org. Welcome, Summer, to I Mix What I Like in the Real News Network.
Thanks for having me.
So it's really a pleasure to have you. We've been wanting to do this for a long time. We love talking about the history of the mixtape, an underappreciated aspect of hip hop's history. Tell us a little bit about the history of the mixtape and why, in particular, you thought it was necessary to have a mixtape museum.
I mean, I made, like you mentioned in your intro, I made mixtapes growing up. I grew up in the city, and I listened to the radio, and I would find myself, recording tapes like before I went to camp or, just heading down to Virginia to visit family. But I honestly did not think of how important mixtapes were until I became an adult and started working in the music industry. And, funny enough, it was Justo, who we'll talk about later, that introduced me to the history of the mixtape and taught me everything that there was, to know about the DJ and how the DJ was using the mixtape to promote records. And it was his house and all of the crazy, things that he had, the mixtape collection, the promo material. And I would always joke and say to him, you could start a museum. And so it started out as a joke, actually. But I just felt like the mixtape was so it was so underrated, and mixtape DJs just got such a bad rap as being, bootleggers, and they were never appreciated for actually breaking records like they did. So, that was one of the reasons why I started the Mixtape Museum. Also to pay homage to Justo for being a visionary and starting the Mixtape Awards, but also to promote the mixtape as not just a little piece of, plastic or a playlist, but also as an artifact, because it tells a story. It tells your personal story. It tells my stories. It tells a DJ's stories, and they'll still be here when we're all dead and gone. And my goal is to, promote archival awareness in the DJ community, but also look at, the different aspects of, of the mixtape as a whole.
Now, we know that, and we are going to talk about Justo in just a moment, but just for folks who may not be familiar, the mixtape originated, as I said in the intro, on cassette tapes, where DJs would create mixes or recordings of their house parties or the parties they performed in parks. And this is before there was rap radio, before BET, before MTV, before even black radio would allow hip hop to be heard. So really, Ards' point is correct, that there was no mass media for rap music, for hip hop's broadly speaking in all of its elements. There was no mass medium for the hip hop nation to use and to circulate its art other than the mixtape. Eventually, they would get moved onto CD around when my generation sort of came into understanding, with particularly DJs Ron G and Kid Capri. And then in the early to mid 90s, you had the full digital switch from cassette onto CD, rather, with DJ Clue. where some have raised questions critical of that moment, where Clue seemed to, instead of using the brilliance of the DJ to blend and bring in new music or create remixes as Ron G did, he just lined up tracks that he got, from A&Rs at major record studios, and lined them up on CDs and put his echo over it. DJ Clue, 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 Clue. And then distributed it that way. And it became a mechanism not only for an underground art to be disseminated, but it became a mechanism primarily for the corporate world to pre-promote music that they would soon release. And somewhat, some of us at least looked at that critically as sort of co-opting the tradition of the mixtape. So I wanted you to take a moment, if you would, to respond or embellish on any that I've just said there. And then I do want us to take a moment to properly situate and pay tribute to Justo Faison.
Okay. Well, okay. See, I have these conversations a lot, and people, especially DJs, like DJ purists, they're not too fond of how the mixtape has evolved. Mm-hmm. So that whole, going from a live tape to being something, a DJ recorded in the studio, to becoming, the exclusive tape, which is essentially what Clue, came up with, was, its own genre. I heard stories about him sitting outside of a studio waiting to get an exclusive track that was just done, a couple minutes before. Right. And then after that, you had artists like 50 that used the mixtape to just put out only their stuff. I mean, right. G Unit was built off of, the mixtape. In Texas, Slim Thug, or even Diddy. So I personally think that change is good. I don't look at it as a negative. I look at it as the mixtape evolving into something so that it can stay around. How else better to keep something around, than to...
Well, with all due respect and much love, of course, we might have to slightly disagree on that, because, there are a lot of people, who still use mixtapes to, the offshoot of what is now called turntablism, where you have some of those DJ purists using mixtapes to really highlight DJ skills, as opposed to just, again, lining up tracks on a CD, so to speak. And of course, now with everything on DatPiff or the MP3, you have people using the mixtape tradition as a way to either just sort of sell a pre-corporate career or promote a pre-corporate career, as opposed to really leaving space for that for the artistry and the underground element to thrive. So in that regard, I am concerned about the co-optive element that seems to have messed up the tradition of the mixtape itself. Right. And I'm happy to have you respond to that, but I did want to make sure that we did take the time before we ran out of time to talk about Justo, because this being 2015, a lot of people are remembering that it's the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X, the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act and of Bloody Sunday in Selma, and this August will be the 50th anniversary of the Watts Rebellion. But what is also an important, I think, aspect of that long tradition of Black history and struggle is Justo's place in this. And this is the 10th anniversary. This May will be the 10th anniversary of his death. And I did want to say that I happened to be at a conference, a media reform conference at that, with the legendary hip-hop journalist Davey D, when he got the phone call alerting him to Justo's car accident and passing. And while many may be uncomfortable with my comparison or extension of that Black struggle history to Justo, I actually do think that what he did with the mixtape and what the mixtape represents as unauthorized communication is part of that legacy of struggle. But tell us about Justo and exactly what his role has been, and what has happened even maybe since his passing to the tribute and attention paid to mixtapes.
Gladly. Justo was a DJ, and he moved on to become marketing director. He was at Atlantic, he was at Loud, he worked at a few different labels. But he worked records, that's what he did. And he used the mixtape DJ to do that. You know, like you said, back then radio was not what it was. But he was able to, you know, go to the clubs, you know, meet DJs, give them the record, and, you know, push it on these tapes that were then pushed through the streets, you know, and handed out and, you know, duplicated. So his thing was he didn't feel like the labels were giving, you know, these DJs their credit for breaking these records. So he started the Mixtape Awards. And many DJs will tell you that, you know, after they got their awards, I mean, K Slay's got a bunch. I think K Slay has the most awards out of anybody.
And K Slay, I'm sorry to interrupt, but K Slay also is one of my favorite nicknames too. Slap your favorite DJ. You know, at one point when I was a more aggressive and hostile faculty member, I used to say I'm Dr. Ball. Slap your favorite professor. You know what I'm saying? I was that impressed and moved by K Slay. But I'm sorry. Please go on.
But you know, through the awards, DJs were able to, you know, see themselves as not just the DJ behind the artist, but you know, they were able to develop personalities. And Clue got a deal not too long after that. You started to see DJs, you know, going out and stepping outside of the you're a bootlegger label and actually becoming their own, you know, their own brand. So that's what, you know, and that's what Justo was trying to do. I mean, he really was just wanted to say thank you.
Right.
But because he was I think he was a marketing genius.
He also created a documentary. I mean, we can't forget that as well. He created his own documentary on the history of mixtapes where he interviewed the legends like, you know, Lazy K and Jazzy Joyce and DJ Hollywood and so many others who were doing those early rooftop parties and who were really the founders of that. And honestly, that's where I got some of the critique of DJ Clue and him being sort of the corporate conduit for that takeover. It was Hollywood, and even K Slay called him out in that documentary, saying, you know, Clue kind of messed up the game a little bit. So, you know, but Justo was not only you know, somebody who was creating a space for awards and commemoration, but he documented the history of the mixtape as well.
He did, and he knew. I mean, he's Mixtape's #1 fan. That's what a lot of DJs know him as. And I mean, we would sit for hours, and that's where he actually made me fall in love with mixtapes.
Right.
You know, the way he talked about, I mean, just, you know, everything. I mean, I didn't know, I wasn't a DJ. I didn't know, like, you know, and I knew I made my own mixtapes, but I didn't realize that the mixtape, you know, game was as big as it was. And I mean, soon after that, I was actually introduced to him by Nancy Byron, who suggested I talk to him because the Clips were coming out with their first mixtape, and Justo helped me distribute that mixtape. And the We Got It for Cheap series that they did with Clinton Sparks wound up being one of the biggest mixtapes that year. So it was Justo, who was not a big Clips fan, I have to add.
But he did it anyway.
But he showed me, we literally drove around for hours and went to all the mixtape spots and, you know, just like the holes in the wall that I didn't know about. And that's how I realized like how big, you know, of a industry that, you know, that it was and how influential it was. Because I watched, you know, and not only did I hear it from him, but I watched the movement of our own mixtape, you know, move through the streets to, you know, being, you know, like a big deal that year.
And it's funny you mention that because even just this morning, I was listening to my classic Clinton Sparks Pharoah Monch mixtape, which is another legendary piece as well. And I just introduced my girls to a classic, an edited version, I have to admit, a classic Ron G mixtape, the blend tape, you know, because remember, people have to understand, Puffy took the idea from Ron G, putting hip-hop beats under R&B tracks. It was not Puffy that did that first, it was Ron G, and you heard it here first in the Mix What I Like at Real News Network.
And Ron G was my first mixtape. Like, that was the first mixtape that I actually went and bought. Yeah, that was my first tape.
Oh, we used to have the Kid Capri numbered tapes floating around, even on the ship I was on in the U.S. Navy in the early 1990s. People would circulate those tapes around, even the beat tapes he did. The mixtape is essential now, and I'm very glad that we took the time to have you on to talk about them with us. Before we wrap up, though, Sommer McCoy, tell us a little bit more about the Mixtape Museum, what people can find there. And maybe one last word on where you think the future of the mixtape is going.
I mean, it's funny that you mentioned mixtapes on the ship. These are the stories that I want to capture. Everyone has a mixtape memory, you know, whether it's on a ship or in their bedroom or at camp or in a studio or wherever. And I want to capture those stories. So I consider the Mixtape Museum an archive and a memory project. So, you know, I think it's important. The one way to save, you know, the authenticity of what a real mixtape is to preserve the history. And, you know, it's not just focusing on, you know, just the hip hop mixtape DJ, but also, you know, talking to people at labels, talking to, you know, I'm working with different archivists to try to figure out how the best way to preserve these tapes. And also building a database so that we can organize the history. I don't think the mixtape is going anywhere. I think that people are starting to appreciate the old mixtape, the real mixtape. I want people digging in their attics and drawers and pulling out old tapes and, you know, pulling the audio off of it. And, you know, I think that's important to help keep the mixtape alive in a sense. So right now, the Mixtape Museum is primarily a blog, and there's a lot of foundation work being done with different academics and whatnot, and as I mentioned, archivists and DJs and there's so many things going on. So I'm looking for a lot of input from people because that's really how I came up with different ideas on, you know, directions to go. I'm always welcome to getting an email. Mixtapemuseum@gmail.com. The website is mixtapemuseum.org. Twitter @mixtapemuseum. Same thing for Instagram. And I look forward to hearing from anyone that has a mixtape memory and can offer, you know, some type of, you know, advice or just a story, because that's what the Mixtape Museum, that's what it is.
Well, Regan Sommer McCoy, thank you very much for joining us on this segment of I Mix What I Like here at the Real News Network.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us as well. Keep it locked here at the Real News Network for the whole I Mix What I Like crew. I'm Jared Ball. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And as Ice Cube once said, turn off the radio and stick a fucking tape in it. Peace, everybody. I mix what I like.